Thanks, Pastor Troy. You can grab a seat. How many of you know that the Easter tomb, Jesus' tomb, is empty? And are you aware that as a follower of Jesus, although you die, one of these days your tomb is going to be empty too? That's the miracle-working God that we serve. Today we're going to continue our study through the Bible book of Esther. We're going to be in Esther chapter 6 today. And I want to tell you about the world record for dominoes. In 2018, there was a group of Germans. They called themselves the Sinners Domino Entertainment. They set the world record for the most dominoes in one complete thing. So they set up, get this number, 596,000 dominoes. It took them weeks to get these dominoes set up. And then they put these things in intricate patterns, in highly scientific ways of doing things, and then they toppled the dominoes, and sure enough, after a few minutes, 596,000 dominoes fell, one right after another. Did you know that people tuned in around the world? In fact, there was a huge following to see this domino record fall. Like how I did that domino record fall? All right, you guys, that went over your head. I think there's some real brain science going on here. Because if you think about it, there's something that fascinates us watching dominoes fall. I think part of it is the anticipation of wanting to see, will this thing go all the way to the end? But there's also more going on here. In fact, what the brilliant, bright minds say about dominoes is that you and I, we're drawn to this just because of our eyes. The patterns that these dominoes say or show when they start to fall, our eyes can't look away. They even tell us that your ears like the sound of those clicking when dominoes fall, one after another after another. But by far, probably the most compelling reason why people watch dominoes fall, why they would watch them by the millions, is because of the cause and effect. There's something in our brain that makes us want to see the results of hard work. And what you get a chance to see with your own eyes and hear with your ears is dominoes falling, the patterns and the clicks of lots and lots of hard work. Well, today in the Bible, dominoes are going to start to fall. And I want you to know that once God tips the first domino, here's basically what this entire chapter of the Bible is trying to tell us. Once God tips the first domino, you can't stop what happens next. And I want you to know about your story. This is not just God's grand plan for all people, all times. Look up here for just a second. I'm talking about you and your specific story, your specific circumstances of life. You see what happened behind the scenes? I'll show you just the largest domino line in history. This is only 7,000 dominoes. What these guys in Germany did was almost 600,000 dominoes. By the way, Sinners Domino Entertainment, it's named after the leader of the group, a guy by the name of Patrick Sinner. A team of people, get this, spent 6 weeks preparing to set this record. And in the course of those 6 weeks, they worked day and night setting up this pattern. And at any time in this pattern, if they were just a millimeter off, the whole thing doesn't work. The dominoes stop falling. If they make one silly mistake and bump a domino with their elbow, weeks worth of work all comes falling to the ground right away. They had to be perfect for this to set a world's record. And the reason I'm telling you about dominoes today is because when God tips the first domino, when He sets events in motion, ain't nobody on planet Earth that can stop what's going to happen next. And that's what the Bible records for us today. This may be the single greatest chain of events anywhere recorded for us in the Bible. And it's found in the book of Esther, chapter 6. What I want you to see right out of the gate is that there is a nail-scarred hand putting dominoes in your life right now and putting them in the perfect place. I'm talking to people in this room or people who are tuned in who are control freaks. Now, don't act like this isn't you, because every single one of us want to be in charge of your life. All of us want to control the outcome of your life. Don't act like it's not you, because this is part of human nature. All of us have this inherent desire to be in charge, which makes it really hard to trust the circumstances of your life, trust the outcome of your life to anyone else. Would you agree with this? What if the person that has control of your life is the most powerful person that's ever existed in history? Would you be willing to trust the results of your life then? What if they were the smartest person in history, far more powerful than you are, far smarter than you are? Would you be willing to turn over control of the events of your life if they were far smarter than you? You see, I use this language on purpose. When I talked about the hand of God, I told you that it was a nail-scarred hand. It was a hand that took the nails and a forehead that took the thrones for your sake and for my sake. And if it was the most loving hand in all time, would you then be willing to turn over control? Because that's the hand that's guiding things behind the scenes for you. Far more powerful, far smarter than you are. But even if those two things were not true, and they are, He is the loving God of the universe, the one who went to the cross on your behalf. And today, you get a chance to see what happens when God tips the first domino. And no one on earth, even somebody who is about as far away from our faith as you can get, recognizes what's going to happen next and recognizes the certainty because God is at work. I want you to see what happens in Esther chapter 6 today. We're going to start reading at the beginning of the chapter and just go all the way through to the end. Verse 1. That night, sleep escaped the king. Now, this is really weird, the way the Bible worded this phrase. We're going to come back to that in just a second. That night, sleep escaped the king. So he ordered the books recording daily events to be brought and read to the king. They found the written report of how Mordecai had informed on Bigthana and Teresh, two of the king's eunuchs who guarded the entrance when they planned to assassinate King Ahasuerus. The king inquired, "What honor and special recognition has been given to Mordecai for this act?" The king's personal attendants replied, "Nothing. We've done nothing. You've done nothing, king, for this guy who literally saved your life." Okay, so as you're reading through the Bible right now, you cannot miss the language that the Bible is using here. And it's using very intentional language on purpose. This is not the normal way that we would say the king couldn't go to sleep. In other words, if you're reading the Bible for the first time, when you get to this chapter, you should be asking the question, am I reading about insomnia right now, or is something else going on? And before you get a couple of verses into this chapter, it's pretty obvious there's something else going on here. There is a reason why the king can't sleep. And he's laying in bed. And chances are he's been working all day long. Chances are that he's tired. Chances are he's laying in the most comfortable bed on earth right now, because this is the most powerful man on earth in the most powerful empire that's ever existed up to this point. And he can't sleep. And so the king does something that doesn't seem that random if you know history. You see, the historians tell us that in the king's royal bedchambers were the records of the events that happened in his reign. It was literally what you and I would refer to in the Hebrew language as the chronicles of the kings. And the king can't sleep, so he's got work to do. Hey, bring the books. Let me open up the chronicles. Let's see what's been going on in the kingdom. Let's see if there's still some rewards that I need to pass out or some punishments that I need to administer. Let's see if I can get some work done because I can't get any sleep tonight. And you can't miss from the language of the Bible, the sleep escaped the king. It literally says in the original language, when he should have been sound asleep, sleep ran away from him. So he brings the chronicles and he starts reading these books. And we don't know how much time has passed. It may be months. It quite literally could be years since the events that are recorded are being read tonight. there was an assassination plot. It's recorded for us earlier in the book of Esther. And two of the king's most loyal servants, the ones that are closest to him, quite literally, they guard his bedchamber. These two servants conspired together to assassinate him. And God revealed this plot ahead of time to Mordecai. And Mordecai told his cousin Esther, who told the king. The king investigated it. And the king killed these two guys for high treason. Now, if you're doing the math at this point, you got to ask, how far into the night is it that the king is reading these books? Because the verb tense tells us this is going on late into the night. And story after story is, they're reading to him story after story. And when he gets to the story of Mordecai, he says, wait, stop. What do we do for this guy? And their answer is, we haven't done anything for him. Now, I want to pause for just a second and take a half a step back and ask the question, why is the king still awake at 1, 2, 4 o'clock in the morning? You see, if you're super tired and you've been working hard all day long and somebody brings the Bible to you and starts reading the books of 1st and 2nd Chronicles, you're going to go to sleep, right? I am too. So how come he's still awake? And more importantly, how come he's still awake all the way to this story right here? Obviously, there's something going on behind the scenes. And the Bible is written today in such a way that you don't even need to see God's name. You cannot miss his hand today. I tell you that because sometimes there's a long period of time that passes between you starting to pray and God actually stepping in and intervening. I'm talking right now to a guy in this room who's been looking for a wife to marry, and he's been doing everything right and pouring his heart out to God. But you ain't finding her. I'm talking to the lady who's listening online right now who wants desperately to be a mother, and she's doing everything that's right, and she's pouring her heart out to God, but no matter how hard she tries, she's not getting pregnant. I'm talking to the guy or the gal who's busting their back at work, but no matter how hard you work, you're not getting that promotion. And at some point, if you're not careful, what's going to happen to you is you're going to say, you know, I don't think the problem is with women. That's not why I'm finding a wife. Or I don't think the problem is with my womb. That's not why I'm getting pregnant. Or maybe it's not a problem of work. Maybe God's at fault here. Because I'm praying and I'm doing everything right and nothing's happening, which is exactly what this would have felt like for Mordecai. The Bible is trying to put you in Mordecai's shoes. He did right by the king, and he got nothing for it, for months or for years. But does that mean that God wasn't paying attention? You see, for those of you who are in the habit of memorizing Bible verses, chances are somebody has challenged you in the past to memorize what the Bible tells us in Romans chapter 8 about how our God is at work. He's at work even in the hard stuff. And my guess is you probably already memorized Romans chapter 8, verse 28, but I want to challenge you with something today. Don't forget verse 29. In fact, I want to ask you, would you make a commitment to yourself? I'm going to go back and memorize Romans chapter 8, verse 28 and verse 29. Because if you miss verse 29, you'll miss the whole reason why verse 28 exists. Here's what the Bible tells us about our God working behind the scenes. Romans chapter 8, verse 28 and 29. And we know that God causes everything, the hard stuff and the good stuff, the sleepless nights as well as the nights that I sleep like a baby. God causes everything to work together for the good of those who love God and are called according to his purposes. You guys have heard this before? Listen to verse 29. For God knew his people in advance, and he chose them to become like his son, so that his son would be the firstborn among many brothers and sisters. The reason why God is placing dominoes in perfect position, and you can't see it behind the scenes, the reason why there's a nail-scarred hand working in your story is so that you would turn out just like him. By learning to trust him and trust him in the good stuff as well as the hard stuff. Romans 8:28 tells us that God's at work, but Romans 8:28-29 tells us why. Because he wants you to live like, think like, talk like, act like Jesus this week, which means hanging on even if things get ugly. And if there is a nail-scarred hand at work, you can trust that hand. And here's why. Nothing, and I mean nothing, in heaven or on earth can stop that hand. One of my favorite authors, one of my favorite Christian writers of all time is C.S. Lewis. And C.S. Lewis used this phrase to refer to God. In fact, C.S. Lewis got this phrase from a poem by a British poet by the name of Thomson. Thomson entitled a poem, look up here. I love this phrase, "The Hound of Heaven." And here's what C.S. Lewis said. The hound of heaven is like a hound dog on a trail. And when a hound dog gets the scent on that trail, there is nothing on earth and no one in heaven that can stop that hound dog from getting to track down that prey. What C.S. Lewis described in his famous book, Surprised by Joy, is the hound of heaven on his trail. And C.S. Lewis said it this way: even when I didn't know God, even when I didn't love God, even when I wanted nothing to do with faith, the hound of the heavens was on my trail. And because the hound of heaven was on my trail, it was inevitable how things are going to turn out. What the Bible's going to show us right now is that the hound of heaven just perked his head up and his ears shot up and turned his attention to a guy by the name of Haman. And let's see what happens when the hound of heaven turns against a guy like Haman. Look at what happens next in verse 4. The king asked, look, this might be 3, 4, 5 o'clock in the morning. The king asked, who's in the court? Now Haman, get this timing. Haman had just entered the outer court of the palace to ask the king to hang Mordecai on the gallows that he had prepared for him. The timing could not be any more perfect. And the king's attendants answered him, Haman's there, standing in the court. Have him enter, the king ordered. And Haman entered, and the king asked him, what should be done for the man the king wants to honor? Look at this sentence on the screen for just a second. It's very intentionally worded this way. In fact, it shows up more than once. It's kind of awkward, the way that it's worded. What should be done for the man the king wants to honor? Haman thought to himself, who could the king want to honor more than me? So Haman told the king, for the man the king wants to honor, very specific phrase, have them bring a royal garment that the king himself has worn and a horse that the king himself has ridden, which has a royal crown on its head. Put the garment on the horse under the charge of one of the king's most noble officials, and then have them clothe the man with the king wants to honor, parade him on the horse through the city square, and call out before him, this is what's done for the man the king wants to honor. The Bible is quoting a Persian phrase today. You see, there is a Greek historian, a guy by the name of Herodotus, who lived in this empire at this time. And Herodotus tells us that there is a very specific category of people. This category is called in Persia the Orasangai. And the Orasangai are quite literally the people the king wants to honor. So what happens here is that the Greek historians, the Persian history books, are lining up perfectly with the Bible. The king wants to honor somebody. The king wants to make somebody Orasangai. And so the king asks, hey, who can do some work for me? And sure enough, at that very instant, Haman walks in the door. Now you need to know the backstory. Haman hates the Jews. He hates Mordecai of the Jews more than anybody else. Haman hates him so much that he's already orchestrated a plot to kill every Jew on earth. Because at this point, the Persian Empire spans the entire known world. And all of the Jews already have an execution date set. But Haman hates Mordecai so much that he's showing up to ask the king, let me kill Mordecai today. Check this out. Haman walks into the courtyard, and he doesn't even get a chance to open his mouth. He doesn't even get a chance to ask the question. The king is already ready before he even walks into the courtyard, and the king says, Haman, hey, I want to honor somebody. What do I do to honor somebody? And Haman gives him this explanation. Where does this explanation come from? Well, the Bible tells us Haman is so arrogant that he thinks it couldn't possibly be anybody else, right? Like there can't be anybody else in the entire known world that the king might want to honor more than me. So obviously he's talking about me. Here's what we need to do next. Do you know what the Bible says about guys like Mordecai or guys like Haman right now? Proverbs 16:18 talks about people like this. You know what it tells us? Pride goes before destruction and arrogance before the fall. I think what the Bible is telling us is God's been putting dominoes in place. God's been working behind the scenes to put all of the dominoes in the perfect place. And by the way, when God lines the dominoes up, they are perfectly lined up so that when you tip the first one, you already know these dominoes are all going to fall. None of them are out of place. But I think what the Bible is doing here is making it so obvious you can't miss it. God didn't even have to put the last domino in place. Oh, he could have, but he didn't have to. Haman was so stupid and so proud that he put his own domino in place. And now that he's put his own domino in place, God's like, hey, thanks for the help, Haman. I'll take it from here. You see, I think what the Bible is reminding us here is if we're not careful, you're going to start to step in because God isn't moving fast enough for you. And you're going to decide, I'm going to have to give God a little hand here because he's not doing what I want when I want him to do it. So let me step in and let me take over. In other words, get that nail-scarred hand out of the equation. Let me use my hands and my brains and my strength, my bronze, to fix things. And when you and I step in the equation and take God out of the equation, do you know what you just did here? You just broke the first commandment. I'm talking about the first of the 10 commandments, which says to have what? Yeah, I know that was hard for some of you. To have no other gods before me. When you pull God's hand out of the equation and you replace it with your hands, do you know what you just did? You just took the role of God. But when I say the first commandment, I'm also talking about the very first commandment that ever happened. God's commandment to Adam and Eve, that I'm in charge and you're not. And I give you one rule, and that one rule is don't eat from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. And you know what Adam and Eve decided? I'm going to do what I want to do. No matter what God told me to do, I'm going to do what I want to do. And Adam and Eve saw the fruit, decided that it looked good, determined that they were going to take a bite of it, and deliberately, intentionally chose to break God's rules. It's the first sin and the first commandment for a reason. Because you and I are strongly tempted to take matters into our own hands, to grab the reins and to decide, God's not doing what I want when I want. So God, I got it from here. You just step back and let me take charge. Let me take over from here. And this Orasang guy that the king is trying to honor, this is a very specific group of people. And really all the king is doing right now is he's doing his job. He just remembered, I didn't do for Mordecai what I was supposed to do for him months or years ago, so now I'm going to do this for him. And I think Mordecai probably went away reminding himself that everything good that happens in his life, it's ultimately because of God's hands, not his hands. In other words, you and I might want to remind ourselves of that too. See, James chapter 1, verse 17 says it this way. Every good gift, every perfect gift that you have in your life, it all comes from the Father of heaven. It all comes from the Father of lights. It's a gift that comes down from him. And I can't take any credit for it, so I wouldn't dare step in and take charge and put his hand off to the side so that I can make my hands do what I want them to do. If he is a good God, if he is a perfect God, then surely I can trust him. But what the challenge from the Bible is today is that trust has to be complete. That trust has to be total. That trust has to be 100%. And by 100%, I mean even his timing. Because I know this is hard for you. Man, it's hard for me too. Things aren't going the way that I want them to go. I choose to step in and do for God what he's not doing for me. And when I do that, I am placing myself in charge and controlling my own destiny instead of trusting Him. And I want to remind all of us what the Bible is trying to teach us today is God's timing is never random. It might feel like nothing is going on, but that timing is never random. And I mean, it's never random in your life. It's not random in Mordecai's life. Listen to what happens next. Haman, this is the moment where God touches the first domino. And even people that share nothing that have nothing to do with our faith recognize what's going to happen next. They see the certainty of God's hand at work here. Here's what the Bible says for us in Esther chapter 6, starting in verse 10. The king told Haman, hurry and do just as you proposed. Dun, dun, dun. Take the garment and the horse for Mordecai the Jew, who is sitting at the king's gate. Don't leave anything out. Do just as you suggested. So Haman took the garment and the horse. And by the way, the noble person that was supposed to parade this guy that the king wants to honor through the city is going to be Haman. He clothed Mordecai, paraded him through the city square, calling out before him, this is what's done for the man the king wants to honor. And then Mordecai returned to the city gates. But Haman hurried off home, mournful and with his head covered. Haman threw dark sunglasses on and put his hoodie over his head because he was so miserable by what just happened. Haman told his wife Zeresh and all of his friends everything that had happened, and his advisors and his wife said to him, get this, look at what the Bible says next. Since Mordecai is Jewish and you have begun to fall before him, you won't overcome him because your downfall is certain. Say the word certain out loud. Certain. The whole chapter is pointing towards this word. What's going to happen next, Mordecai, or what's going to happen next, Haman, is certain. And while they were still speaking with him, the king's eunuchs arrived and they rushed Haman off to the banquet that Esther had prepared for him. What the Bible is saying here is that Haman just got punched in the gut. If he was a gamer, I think the language here is, Haman, chat, you're cooked because of what's about to happen next. You see, the Bible is describing for us this elaborate plan. And by the way, Haman didn't just come up with this plan off the top of his head. There was a very established rule for the man that the king wants to honor, for the Orasang guy. And that rule is, we're going to put the king's clothes on him. We're going to put him on the king's horse. We're going to put a crown on the horse's head, and we're going to parade him through the city. And we want everybody in town to know how awesome this guy on the horse is. Guess who's the one doing the crying? How awesome Mordecai is? It's Haman, who showed up that day to ask the king to murder Haman. Did you see what the Bible just said to us? Haman didn't even get a chance to ask the question. It never even got a chance to open his mouth before the king said to him, rush out and do for Mordecai what you thought you were going to do for yourself, Haman. And what the Bible is really starting to describe for us is how these dominoes have been placed perfectly. Listen, if you were with us from the start of this Bible book, God's never mentioned by name, but you cannot miss his hand, right? Because the king throws a party and he decides he wants to show off how beautiful his wife is. So he wants everybody to know about her body or her beauty. And he orders the queen Vashti to show up. But she says no. And the first domino is placed. And then the king finds out the only appropriate response is to replace her with a new queen. And Esther, this Jewish woman, is chosen to replace Vashti as queen of the most powerful empire in history. Second domino. But Mordecai tells Esther, because you're my cousin, I want to take care of you. You probably shouldn't tell anybody your ethnicity. They're not going to like the fact that you're Jewish. Third domino. And then Haman hatches a plan to kill all of the Jews, and Esther and Mordecai began to fast and seek God's favor. Esther bravely goes in front of the king, unannounced, putting her life on the line, and the king extends his favor to her, and Esther's life is spared. Fourth domino. And then this plot to assassinate Mordecai, build some gallows 75 feet high so that everybody in town can see how much I hate this guy. Fifth domino. Then the king can't sleep. And it is not random that he can't sleep tonight. Sixth domino. So the king orders some books to be read, and the books happen to point to the exact page with the exact story of the exact guy who did something to save the king's life and never got recognized for it. Seventh, eighth, ninth domino. Now the dominoes are starting to line up. And the very moment that the king wants to do something about it, Haman steps into the courtyard, 10th domino. And when the king asks him, who do I use and how do I honor this guy? Haman decides it's got to be me he's talking about. And Haman puts the last domino in place himself. So that all God has to do is touch the first one. And what the Bible tells us is that this is so obvious. Please don't miss this, y'all. That even his wife, who is about as far from Jesus as you can possibly get on earth, who does not share what we believe at all, even his wife Zeresh says, I can tell you what's about to happen, Haman. Everybody can see what's about to happen next, because all of us can see the hidden hand of God at work now. You set those dominoes up, you put yourself in that last place, in that last domino, and now that they've started to fall, all of us can see that this is certain. And by the way, the word certain that you just said is the word that we use for inevitable. Think about the giant oak tree that was standing on a hillside against storms and against snow, and it's been there against weight and against worry and against all of the nature can throw at it. But when you start to cut into that oak tree, you cut far enough. And what happens next is certain. No one on earth, all of our equipment on earth can't stop what's going to happen next. When that oak tree gets to a point where it starts to fall, it is going to hit the ground. Haman, you giant oak tree, you just started to fall. And no one can stop it. You know, one of the most cataclysmic events in all of human history happened not much more than a century ago. You see, for hundreds of years, kings and princes all across Europe wanted to expand their empire, and they did it by fighting against the neighboring territories. It was warfare upon warfare for centuries. And the governments of Europe decided, man, we have to do something to prevent this from continuing. So governments started to form alliances, and one country started to align themselves with other countries. And all of those leaders thought, we're doing this to protect our people so that our people won't get killed unnecessarily in war until the summer of 1914. You see, there were already factions at each other's throat in Europe. And in June of 1914, June 28th, in fact, a guy by the name of Archduke Ferdinand showed up to the country of Serbia, to the capital city of Sarajevo. And while he was in that capital city, there was an assassination attempt, not once, but multiple assassination attempts on his life. His advisors already told him, don't go, because it's too dangerous for you. But he showed up, he's in a motorcade, he's riding through the city streets of Sarajevo, and they tried to bomb his car, but they missed the car and the bomb exploded next to him. It caused panic. His driver panicked, and people started to scurry everywhere, and the guys that were conspiring to kill the Archduke, they all thought, well, that's it. It failed. So they started to go home. One of the gunmen was hungry and stopped to get a sandwich at a local shop. And the driver of Archduke Ferdinand diverted from the route to spare the Archduke's life, got off of the main route, and pulled down a side road to turn around right in front of the gunman as he was ordering a sandwich. The gunman took out the gun, fired 2 shots, and killed the Archduke, June 28th, 1914. When the Archduke was assassinated, the Austria-Hungary government immediately declared war against Serbia. Problem is, Russia was an ally of Serbia. So Russia had no choice but to enter the war on behalf of Serbia. And because Russia was an ally of Serbia, Germany declared war against Russia. Now, when Germany declared war against Russia, France decided we're going to step in and help, but Germany, to prevent that from happening, invaded France. In order to get to France, they had to pass through Belgium, which was an ally of Great Britain. And now that Germany has invaded Belgium, England is at war against Germany. In a matter of weeks, no one on earth could stop what was going to happen next. In fact, a couple of years later, the entire world is involved, to include the islands of Japan, and even the United States on the opposite side of the Atlantic Ocean. 4 years later, 16 million people are dead because of World War I. And what those original leaders attempted to do is to create some alliances to prevent war. And what actually happened is it caused the world's first war, the war to end all wars. If you were alive during that time, you referred to it as the Great War because it is the worst war that could ever happen. And what the Bible is telling us today is when these events start to unfold, there is no one on earth and no one in heaven that can stop it. But the obvious challenge for us today, and I feel this struggle just like you do, it's very simple to say and very hard to do. It's tomorrow morning, when things aren't going your way, tomorrow morning when it feels like everything is mundane and God isn't even around you, isn't even involved, tomorrow morning when it's miserable and it feels like God has turned his back on you, do you have the kind of faith that you can trust him 100% to include the timing? Because God's timing is never random. And by the way, God's hand is far more powerful than you, and you can trust it because that hand bears the scars of what it took for you and I to be forgiven. What I'm going to do is challenge somebody today in this room or tuned in to take the biggest step of faith in your life. Today, would you trust him with your soul? Would you be willing to place your life, your future, your fortune, your family, everything in his hands? Because if you will trust the nail-scarred hands, he will take over. And he'll do a far better job than you or I can. If you are already a follower of Jesus, would you be willing this week to say, not my plans, I'm not in charge, I won't violate the first commandment, I'm going to trust God's plan this week, even if it doesn't go my way, even if it doesn't make sense, even if things are not going the way that I want them to go. Would you be willing to trust him that much? Because if you are, then you can start to fulfill God's original plan for you. Romans chapter 8, verse 29, that you would be conformed to the image of Christ, that you would look like Christ and you would live like Christ in your community this week. That's God's challenge for all of his people all over the world. Would you bow your heads? Let me pray for us right now. God in heaven, maybe today somebody is confronted with a heart that's only halfway surrendered to you. Maybe this is the moment that you're calling them to total surrender. And somebody listening to my voice or somebody who's come into this room today needs to go through this miracle, a resurrection miracle, this Easter miracle. They need to go from turning over a dead heart that has been controlled by their own hands and placing their life in your hands and trusting you with it. Would you cause somebody who's listening right now to simply surrender to you? Maybe in a simple prayer. There's no magic in these words. But maybe they would just cry out to you, God, forgive me. God, I've been trying to be in charge of my own life, and I don't even deserve your forgiveness, but today I turn it all over. All of my mistakes, all of my past, all of my good deeds, as well as my bad, I place them all in your hands. And I believe that you can do a better job with it than I can. So I'm turning from myself, and I'm turning from my sin, and I'm turning to you for the first time. God, would you hear a prayer like this from heaven? Would you honor it? And would you change somebody right now? But those that have already made this commitment, God, I believe you're calling us to make the toughest choice that we'll ever make. Not just one day, but every day of our lives, to get up tomorrow morning and make the decision, I will not call the shots. I will not be in charge. I will trust the nail-scarred hands. I will let God have control of my life. And God, I want to make a difference. Would you cause your people to want to make a difference? They care so much about you and about your glory that they're willing to go out and to impact somebody and push back darkness in their neighborhood. God, would you do this so that you would be glorified and people would see our good deeds and they would give you credit for it from heaven. God, I pray all these things in Jesus' name. Amen.